Welcome to Talking Paper's Faceless podcast. Today we are taking a deep dive into the risk management framework from the South Australian Department for Communities and Social Inclusion.
DCSI.
Yeah, DCSI. It's basically their guide to navigating uncertainty and making smart decisions. And what's interesting is they've really created a whole culture around it.
It's not just like a set of rules, it's a way of thinking.
Yeah.
They talk about fostering a culture of inquiry, learning, trust, open communication, and continuous improvement. And you see that kind of woven throughout the entire framework.
Yeah, it's like a mouthful. But it sounds like they're trying to get away from that old school, like, risk-averse mentality.
Exactly. They're not afraid of risk. They're embracing it.
Yeah.
They get it that taking risks, calculated risks, are essential for achieving their goals. And you see that reflected in how they approach everything, from strategic planning to, like, day-to-day operations.
So they're not just like hiding under their desks hoping nothing bad happens.
Right.
But how do they actually go about managing all these risks?
Yeah.
The world is a pretty unpredictable place.
Well, they start by realizing that, risks come in different flavors. So they've identified three main types of risk: strategic, operational, and project risks.
Oh, okay. Could you give us a concrete example of each type? I'm
Yeah.
kind of like a hands-on learner.
Sure. Imagine DCSI is launching a new initiative to improve digital literacy in the community.
Okay.
A strategic risk might be something like a sudden shift in government funding priorities, something that throws their whole plan off track.
Oh, okay. So something big, external, that could really derail the entire project.
Exactly. Now, an operational risk, on the other hand, might be something like a cybersecurity breach that compromises sensitive client data.
Oh, that would be bad.
Yeah.
What about project risk?
A project risk might be something like a key staff member leaving unexpectedly, something that causes delays and disruptions.
Oh, okay. So each type of risk needs a different approach.
Yeah, precisely. They use different tools and strategies depending on the nature of the risk and its potential impact. For instance, they might use a SWOT analysis to assess their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, when dealing with operational risks.
Okay, that makes sense. So they've identified these risks. Now what? Do they just cross their fingers and hope for the best?
Not quite. They have a very systematic process for managing risk, and it all starts with establishing the context.
Okay, so what does that mean? They're like setting the scene for the risk management drama.
Exactly. They need to understand the bigger picture before they can dive into specific risks. So they consider things like their overall objectives, the internal and external factors that might influence those objectives, even their own risk appetite.
Risk appetite. What is that? Like how much spicy food they can handle?
Kind of like how much risk they're willing to stomach. They've actually determined that they're comfortable with a moderate or lower level of risk, meaning they're not going to gamble with anything that could have catastrophic consequences.
So no high-stakes poker for DCSI.
Not exactly. But they also recognize that avoiding all risk would paralyze them.
Yeah.
They need to take calculated risks to achieve their goals. And that's where the next step in their process comes in: identifying risks.
Okay, so this is where they brainstorm all the potential, pitfalls and opportunities.
You got it. They try to be as comprehensive as possible at this stage, considering what could go wrong, why it might happen, where it might occur, when it might happen, even how it might unfold.
Sounds like a pretty thorough process.
It is. They don't want to miss anything crucial at this stage. They want to identify as many potential risks and opportunities as possible so they can make informed decisions.
So once they've identified all these risks, what happens next? Do they just, throw their hands up in despair?
Not at all. The next step is to analyze those risks, and this involves understanding the nature of each risk, determining its potential causes and consequences, and identifying any existing controls that might already be in place.
Okay, so they're digging deeper into each risk to understand its potential impact and if they're already doing anything to mitigate it.
Exactly. They're looking at the likelihood of the risk occurring, the potential consequences if it does occur, and any existing measures they have in place to prevent or minimize those consequences.
Okay, and this is where their famous DCSI risk assessment matrix comes in.
You bet. This matrix is their secret weapon for visually representing and ranking risks based on their likelihood and potential consequences. It's like a risk heat map.
Ooh. Okay, how does it work?
Well, they have two axes. One representing the likelihood of the risk occurring, and the other representing the potential consequence or impact if it does occur. And each risk is then plotted on this matrix. And that gives them a clear visual representation of their overall risk profile.
Oh, cool. So, A risk that's highly likely to occur and would have a severe impact would be in the red zone.
Exactly. And that's where their risk appetite comes into play. They've already determined they're not comfortable with risks that fall into the high or extreme categories.
Okay, so if a risk lands in the red zone, they need to take action.
Absolutely. They can't just ignore it. They need to implement measures to either reduce the likelihood of the risk occurring or minimize its potential impact.
Got it. And that's where risk treatment comes in. Right.
You got it. They have several options at their disposal. They can accept the risk, they can transfer it, they can avoid it, they can mitigate it, or even exploit it if it's an opportunity.
So they have a whole toolkit for dealing with these risks.
Exactly. And the DCSI risk assessment matrix helps them choose the right tool for the job. It's a key part of their systematic approach to managing risk.
This is starting to all make sense. They've identified the risks, they've analyzed them. Now they're figuring out how to deal with them.
Precisely. And they're not doing it in isolation. They have a whole framework in place to ensure that everyone is involved and accountable, from the chief executive down to frontline staff.
So the team effort, everyone has a role to play in managing risk.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes their approach so effective. It's not just about following a set of rules. It's about creating a culture of risk awareness and shared responsibility.
This is really fascinating. They clearly put a lot of thought into this framework.
They have. And it shows in how they approach everything from strategic planning to day-to-day operations. Risk management is like woven into the very fabric of their organization.
I'm really impressed with their commitment to transparency and accountability. It's clear they're not just ticking boxes. They're genuinely committed to managing risk effectively.
And that's what sets them apart. They're not afraid to acknowledge that, the world is inherently uncertain. Instead of trying to avoid uncertainty, they're embracing it and using it to make more informed and strategic decisions.
This has been a great overview of their approach to risk management. But I'm eager to delve deeper into some of the specifics. Can we talk more about the different risk treatment options and how they decide which one to use?
Absolutely. That's a great place to pick up our conversation.
Okay, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of risk treatment. I'm curious to hear more about their decision-making process.
All right. Let's explore the different tools they use to navigate the world of risk treatment and how they make those crucial decisions.
Sounds like we're about to get even deeper into the fascinating world of DCSI's risk management framework.
Indeed, we are. So we talked about how DCSI identifies and analyzes risks, but now let's get into the action part, like how they actually treat those risks.
Okay, so let's unpack their risk treatment toolkit. What options do they have?
Well, they've got a range of strategies, like sometimes they'll simply accept the risk.
Oh,
And this might happen if the likelihood and impact are both low, or if the cost of trying to reduce the risk outweighs the potential benefits.
so it's like saying, we know this risk is out there, but we're okay living with it.
Exactly. But they document that decision really carefully, so everyone understands why they're choosing to accept that risk.
Okay, that makes sense. What are some other options?
Another option is risk transfer.
Okay.
And this is where they shift the responsibility for managing the risk to a different party.
Oh, like insurance.
Exactly. Insurance is a classic example of risk transfer. They also use contracts and agreements to transfer certain risks to external providers.
So it's kind of like outsourcing the risk management.
In a way, yeah, but they still need to carefully select and monitor those third parties to make sure they're managing the risk effectively.
Okay, so they can accept the risk, they can transfer it. What else?
Then there's risk avoidance.
Okay.
And this means ceasing or changing an activity to try to eliminate the risk altogether.
So if a project is deemed way too risky, they might just scrap it.
Sometimes, yeah, but avoidance isn't always feasible or even desirable. They have to weigh the potential benefits of the activity against the level of risk involved.
Right, they can't just avoid everything. What about risk mitigation? That sounds like the most proactive approach.
It is. Risk mitigation involves implementing controls to try and reduce the likelihood or the impact of the risk.
So it's like taking steps to make the risk less likely to happen or less severe if it does.
Exactly. For example, to mitigate the risk of a cyber attack, they might strengthen their IT security systems, provide cybersecurity training to staff, and implement really robust data backup procedures.
Okay, I see how this is all fitting together. They identify the risks, analyze them, and then they choose the most appropriate treatment strategy.
And their decision-making is guided by their risk appetite and their overall objectives. They want to find that sweet spot between managing risk effectively and still achieving their goals.
Speaking of objectives, you mentioned earlier that they sometimes even exploit risks. How does that work?
Yeah, that's when a risk actually presents an opportunity. So they might decide to take a calculated risk to try and achieve a significant gain.
So it's like turning a potential threat into a potential advantage.
Exactly. It requires careful consideration and planning, but it can be a really effective strategy.
I'm impressed with their comprehensive approach to risk treatment. It seems like they have a tool for every situation.
And they're not afraid to use those tools. They understand that effective risk management is essential for achieving their goals and delivering value to the community.
But it's not just about having the right tools, is it? It's also about having the right people in place.
You're absolutely right. DCSI has a very clear framework for roles and responsibilities in risk management, and it ensures accountability at every level.
So it's not just one person's job, it's a team effort.
Exactly. Everyone has a role to play, from the chief executive down to, frontline staff.
Can you give some examples of these different roles and responsibilities?
Sure. At the top, you have the chief executive, who's ultimately accountable for establishing and maintaining a strong risk culture across the whole department.
So they set the tone for the entire organization.
Precisely, they ensure that risk management is integrated into everything they do.
What about senior management? What are their responsibilities?
They're responsible for implementing the risk management framework within their specific divisions or business units, so they champion the risk management process and make sure it's embedded in their day-to-day operations.
So they're like the bridge between the high-level strategy and the on-the-ground implementation.
Exactly. They also play a key role in identifying and assessing risks within their areas of responsibility.
The document mentions risk assessment facilitators, or RAFs. What do they do?
They're like the risk management champions within each team.
Okay.
They're nominated by senior management, and they receive special training to support their colleagues in implementing the risk management process.
So they're like the go-to people for anything risk-related.
Exactly. They facilitate risk assessment workshops, they help teams develop risk treatment plans, and they ensure that risk registers are kept up to date.
It sounds like a pretty important role.
It is. They're the ones who really help to embed that risk management culture within the organization.
And what about just like regular employees? What are their responsibilities?
Well, DCSI emphasizes that every employee has a role to play in managing risk, so they're expected to be aware of the risks associated with their work, to actively report any potential hazards or incidents, and to follow established procedures to try and mitigate those risks.
So it's not just a top-down approach, it's more like a shared responsibility.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture where everyone is empowered to identify and address risks.
This whole system of roles and responsibilities seems really well thought out.
It is. They've clearly put a lot of effort into making sure that risk management is everyone's business.
But even with the best systems and the most dedicated people, things can still go wrong.
Yeah. Of course, that's why they have a process for risk escalation, which makes sure that significant risks are brought to the attention of senior management and addressed appropriately.
So if a risk can't be managed effectively at the team level, it gets escalated up the chain of command.
Exactly. This ensures that the right people are involved in making decisions about how to manage those critical risks.
And all of this is documented in their risk register, right?
Precisely. The risk register is their central hub for all things risk-related. It captures all the identified risks, their assessments, the assigned risk owners, the implemented controls, the status of treatment plans, everything.
So it's like a living document that tracks their risk management journey.
Exactly. It's a valuable tool for monitoring and reporting on their risk profile, and it provides evidence that they're taking a systematic and proactive approach.
This whole framework is really starting to paint a clear picture of how DCSI approaches risk management.
And it's not just about avoiding negative outcomes, it's also about seizing opportunities and making informed decisions when faced with uncertainty.
Their focus on a culture of inquiry learning and continuous improvement is really impressive.
It shows their commitment to creating a truly resilient and effective organization.
We've talked about DCSI's risk appetite and how they have this really comprehensive approach to risk treatment. But I'm curious how they monitor and review all their efforts. It's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing, right?
No, not at all. DCSI is big on continuous improvement, which means they're constantly evaluating the effectiveness of their risk management practices and making adjustments as needed.
So how do they actually go about doing that?
Well, remember that risk register we talked about?
Yeah.
That plays a really big role in their monitoring and review process.
Right, the living document that tracks all their risk stuff.
Exactly. They use the risk register to track the status of the risks, the implementation of controls, and how effective their treatment plans are. It lets them see what's working, what's not, and where they need to make changes.
So it's like a feedback loop, constantly informing their risk management strategy.
Exactly. They also do regular reviews of the actual risk management framework itself, making sure it stays relevant and effective as things change.
And who's in charge of these reviews?
It's a team effort. They have dedicated risk management and audit committees that provide oversight and guidance, and they bring in people from across the organization to participate in the review process.
This commitment to constantly improving is really impressive.
Yeah.
It's not just about checking boxes, it's about genuinely trying to get better.
Yeah, and you see that reflected in their culture of learning and open communication.
What?
They encourage staff to report near misses and incidents, not to blame anyone, but as a way to learn and improve.
So they see mistakes as valuable learning experiences.
Exactly. They understand that every near miss or incident is a chance to find weaknesses in their systems and make them stronger.
This whole approach is so insightful. I'm seeing how a proactive and transparent approach can actually empower an organization rather than hold it back.
It's all about changing the mindset from risk avoidance to risk intelligence.
Yeah.
Understanding and embracing uncertainty so you can make better, more strategic decisions.
And DCSI's framework is a great model for any organization that wants to develop a more mature and effective approach to managing risk.
It really shows their commitment to creating a culture of accountability, transparency, and continuous improvement.
This has been such an interesting deep dive into DCSI's risk management framework. I'm definitely walking away with a whole new perspective on risk and how important it is for success.
It's been great exploring this document with you. I hope our listeners found it as helpful as we did.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you found this podcast interesting.